This is the new 911 GTS T Hybrid. And obviously because it's a hybrid, it's absolutely terrible, so I thought I should drive around in the Targa 4 GTS, which is clearly the worst, least sporting model because, well, we must all just pack up and go home. I mean, hybrid, it's just a Toyota Prius, isn't it? I give up.
Except this is not the time to abandon all hope, because this is a slightly different sort of hybrid, with a distinct reason for its existence and a very positive impact on performance. If this film electrifies your turbo, then do please think about joining the Hagerty Drivers Club. You get an award-winning magazine and myriad other benefits. To find out more, just click on the link below.
Well, that's a different start. We'll come back to the hybrid stuff in a minute, but I think it's first worth going through all the other bits that make up this GTS and some of the changes. And it's weird for a start to be driving a GTS as the first model in a new variant of the 911 because, well, it normally comes at the end and sort of cherry picks all the bits off the other models. But this is very much its own standalone thing.
The first distinctive thing you'll notice about the GTS, unless you approach it at night or with your eyes closed, is of course the way it looks.
We've now got these sort of Venetian blinds at the front, which are, well, they're sort of quite fun, I think. They stay closed in normal and sport and wet. Wet obviously just to keep stuff out from those front radiators. But in normal and sport you want the lowest coefficient of drag possible, so they stay closed. Then in Sport Plus, or if the brakes get too hot, they open up to let more cooling air go in. There's also another important flap, in fact, just under the nose as well, which works in tandem with those in exactly the same way to also aid the cooling. At the front we've also got new HD matrix headlights with new sort of graphics, I suppose, in terms of these sort of slashes across them, the 4 slashes instead of just the dots we had before.
All the lights are in fact now housed in the main units, making for a subtly cleaner look.
At the back, on top of the engine cover, we've got these sort of strakes that go up and seem to blend more into the rear screen on this new GTS. We've also got a new rear diffuser with a tailpipe sort of closer together in the centre.
You can get an aero kit as well, with a fixed wing that adds up to 30 kilos of downforce at the rear. You can't put that on a Targa though, that would just be silly.
Inside, a lot of the interior is, well, very familiar from the first generation of the 992, but there are a couple of big changes, starting with the dials in here, because gone is the physical central rev counter, which is, well, it's a shame, really. I get why they've done it, because it was getting harder and harder to see the sort of outer dials as this steering wheel shrinks in diameter, so you were sort of having to look around to see the outer edges of what was on the screen behind it. So they've shrunk it down and they've given this sort of 7 different layouts in here which you can scroll through like this, including, well, a digital facsimile of what was there before. So works well, it's just a bit of a shame. Something else, they've now integrated Apple CarPlay into here sort of much more deeply, so you can have your native apps in there. We've got a cooled charging bay in there for your iPhone or Android. And then in the back, because as standard, this now comes without rear seats. It's just a 2-seater, not just the Targa, all across the range. This one actually has got the seats, and it is a no-cost option to have them back in, and that's all to do with weight, which we'll come back to. Other things to say, well, we've got more PTS options as well. Exterior colours, 127 of them now, including, presumably, ruby stone.
This Targa is painted in carmine red, by the way, and in case you think I was being horribly disparaging about it in the intro, I do realise it's some people's favourite, and its half coupe, half convertible hybrid roof does look very at home down here on the Costa del Sol. It's just that at 1745 kilos, or about 3,850 pounds, this car weighs 150 kilos, 330 pounds, more than the lightest GTS available.
The Targa also has slightly different suspension, it's worth mentioning, so it doesn't get the 10mm drop and it doesn't have the helper springs that you find on the rest of the GTS range, so it is just that bit less sporting. And then we come back to the hybrid system, and I think we should start with why. Why has Porsche done this? And there are all sorts of good reasons as to why they've gone e-hybrid in terms of performance and response, but at the root of it, the very core of the reason, is to do with emissions.
Where it gets confusing is that the new GTS has broadly very similar fuel consumption and CO2 emissions figures to the old non-hybrid GTS. So what gives? Well, this is all to do with a new piece of legislation around something called Lambda 1.
So what is lambda equals 1? Well, with the help of my trusty analog writing implement, the amazing Porsche pencil here, I shall attempt to explain. Lambda is the 11th letter of the Greek alphabet, and in terms of cars, it's used to express the mixture of fuel and air. When lambda equals 1, it's the perfect mixture, so everything's burnt up, and the catalytic converters also are at their happiest. They're working at their most efficient. If lambda is greater than 1, up here, then your engine's running lean, so you've got more oxygen on that side of things. And potentially it's more efficient, but the catalytic converters aren't working as well. If it's running at less than 1 lambda, then your engine's running rich, and you've got more fuel in there than oxygen, so you're having unburnt fuel. Now, most of the time you think, well, that's fine, just run at lambda equals 1. Clearly it's the most efficient way, perfectly sensible. The trouble is, in a high performance engine, sometimes you want to run your engine a bit rich. Why is that? Well, in a high performance engine, obviously high revs, lots of high torque, the engine will get hot, and you need to find a way of cooling that down, and a very efficient, easy way of doing it is to run it a bit rich. So you have unburnt fuel in there, that cools the engine down, but the catalytic converter doesn't like it. And now legislation has said, we don't like it either, because emissions, they're not great. So you've got to run at lambda equals 1, which means the car companies, like Porsche, have got to find a way of keeping the performance, but keeping the temperatures down without running rich.
Given all this, what are the options?
Perhaps the best way in terms of power and torque outputs is with water injection, because you can actually get more power by using water injection, but it is a bit of a faff, because you have to keep topping up, obviously, some sort of water reservoir and carry more fluids around with you.
Instead, Porsche went down an electrified route, but a regular, weighty, plug-in e-hybrid wasn't what was needed here. This required something a bit different, something a bit more Formula 1.
Let's bring our 911 GTS T-Hybrid up out of the floor. I feel like some sort of Silicon Valley Dumbledore right now. There it is. And if we strip away the bodywork from this, we can see what is underneath and what is powering this new 911. At the front, we've got a battery. So it's not the 12-volt battery, it sits in the same place as before to keep weight distribution the same. It weighs 27 kilos. It's a 1.9 kilowatt hour battery, so it's not that big a battery, but that doesn't actually matter. It is lithium-ion, liquid-cooled, and 216 cells in it. Now, if we move further down the car, and I think if we actually just strip away some of the other stuff so we can see what is going on in the car more clearly, in the middle, we've got an eMotor. So it's a 40 kilowatt eMotor, which is producing 53 brake horsepower, 111 pounds-feet of torque, and that sits inside the 8-speed PDK. Then, as we move further back down the car, we have the engine. It's a totally new flat six engine, so 3.6 litres instead of 3 litres before, but they've kept the bore and stroke ratios the same to make it easier for them because they understand those pretty well. Now, as you can see, they've actually stripped quite a lot out because of this new architecture, so it sits 110 millimetres lower than before, and there's no belt drive, no starter motor either. On its own, this engine puts out 478 brake horsepower and 420 pounds-feet of torque, so that's separate from the eMotor. Now, the other thing you might have noticed is that we've gone down from 2 turbochargers to just the 1, and that is an e-turbocharger.
The first thing to say is that this new turbo is bigger. Not this humongous, obviously, but larger, and as with the flat 6 having a larger capacity, this all helps keep temperatures down, which is crucial. However, a larger turbo means slower spooling up, so this has an electric motor between the turbine and the compressor wheel, so that when there aren't enough exhaust gases, the motor can do the job instead and spin it up. It also means Porsche can get rid of the wastegate, and when there are enough exhaust gases to spin the turbine, the motor can then act as a generator and send up to 11 kilowatts back towards the battery, which is key to maintaining lambda at 1. Clever stuff, and probably not something to service at home. But how does it feel to drive? Time for the track.
This is a bit more like it. So now we've got obviously a coupe rear wheel drive. So this should be, we've got the carbon roof as well, the 1595 kilos, the sub 1600 kilos that they were aiming for. We've also got proper suspension in this. So we've got the 10mm drop for the sports suspension. The PDCC, which I've got turned on now because we're in Sport Plus, that's also been uprated for this. So they haven't really talked about it that much because obviously the hybrid has taken, well, the majority of the limelight, but with the new electrical architecture they've been able to make use of all of that and make the PDCC, the anti-roll system, respond that much more quickly. Just for some context, so this has 534 brake horsepower as a system, 450 pound-feet of torque. The GT3, 503 brake horsepower and 347 pounds-foot of torque. So this has got significantly more, certainly in terms of torque.
Add in some big 315 section rear tyres and the new GTS can reach 60 miles an hour in just 2.9 seconds, 0.3 faster than before and a tenth faster than even a GT3 RS. It's obviously still some way behind the RS in terms of outright lap time, but nonetheless, in the hands of Jörg Bergmeister, this GTS lapped the Nordschleife in just 7 minutes 16.9 seconds, 8.7 seconds quicker than the previous GTS.
The steering, I noticed as soon as I got into this, there's a really nice weight to it, gives you a lot of confidence, and it's easy to balance the car through the corners on the road. Rides really well, so we've also got the helper springs in this that we didn't have in the Targa. Yes, you can feel the extra weight over a GT3, but it's so well controlled and gives you so much confidence over these curbs. Rides those well. Enormous great brakes, obviously, which you'd expect given the extra weight. This has got the optional carbon ceramics, the PCCBs. They're now a monstrous size. They're 420mm in diameter on the front with the 10 piston calipers from the turbo. 410mm on the rear. I love Ascari. What a cool circuit. With all these corners inspired from other circuits around the world. Right, down to this tight corner here. I feel like the downshifts aren't quite responding as snappily as I'd perhaps expect from a PDK. Upshifts are absolutely fine. This 8-speed has been strengthened, understandably, for the new hybrid powertrain. But the response of it is extraordinary, both on the track but out on the road as well. You go for an overtake and absolutely there. It's almost as though it doesn't matter what gear you're in.
The engineers say that the turbo response time for this T-Hybrid has dropped from 3 seconds to under 1 second to reach full boost, but I'd say the overall effect of the whole system feels even more impressive than that sounds. I also love the fact that it can essentially act like anti-lag on the way into corners, keeping the turbo spooled up for the exit.
The other thing is that if you just don't think about the fact you're in a hybrid, you don't really notice it. There's no sort of gaps or holes in the torque delivery, which is really nice, because sometimes in the past with hybrids you can kind of get an initial surge and then a dip and then a rise again, but with this it just doesn't seem to happen like that. The only thing is, because there's so much response the whole time, it's almost quite difficult to know what gear you're in. It sort of almost plays with your mind a bit, because there's just response everywhere, torque all over the place. What's also fascinating is having the screens up here, so I can see where the energy is going, whether it's going into the turbo or the motor or coming back into the battery. And also on the rev counter up here, you've got the little green and blue going left and right, which if you get distracted by it, well, it's quite easy to get distracted by it, particularly out on the road, because it's fascinating watching it, how much it's regenerating into the battery. I'm driving pretty quickly around here. You'd think using an awful lot of that battery, depleting it a lot, we still got 75%.
Along with the eTurbo, both the eMotor and the Flat 6 can also help to recharge the battery with regen under braking or when full performance isn't required for acceleration. As mentioned, it does all add weight, but the engineers say when you tot it all up it comes to 46 kilos or 101 pounds for the hybrid system alone. Take away a cheeky 10 kilos for the now optional rear seats, add in 14 kilos for things like the standard rear wheel steer, and you reach the 50 kilo delta over the old non-hybrid GTS. Do you feel it? Most of the time, not really, only just right at the limit.
You can feel the rear weight still. This is still a 911 when you really start pushing the limits. Just there as you recover from slides, that's where perhaps you can feel some of the weight coming in. But it's controllable. For everybody that was trepidatious about Porsche 911s going hybrid, you really don't need to be.
I was as sceptical as anybody about this new GTS, but it really is so impressive. And the contrast to a non-hybrid 911 is stark. I got into the newly updated Carrera afterwards and was slightly shocked at the difference. The base 911's 3-litre flat 6 now has the turbos from the old GTS, the intercooler from the old turbo, and puts out a decent 389 brake horsepower and 332 pounds-feet of torque. It's 75 kilos lighter too, and yet the response is night and day. The Carrera is also missing one thing at the moment.
What I would like is a manual gearbox, which obviously you can't now get in the GTS because you've got that electric motor in the PDK, so manuals are out for that. There is no option for a manual in the Carrera at the moment, but I spoke to Frank Moser, who is Mr. 911 at the moment and 718 line as well, and he just said we have some ideas, so hopefully it's not the death of the manual in the Carrera.
Even with PDK, the base 911 is still a lovely thing to drive, and costing a whisker under £100,000, it's a significant 30k less than the GTS. But, more than ever before, it now feels like there is a much greater gap between the two offerings in terms of performance, sound, and sportiness. Emissions might be the sterile sounding reason for the T-Hybrid, but the result certainly isn't lacking in emotion.